and welcome back to the Silmarillion Film Project, twice in a single week. Well, over the course of 7 days, not in a calendar week, but still very, probably for many people, very surprising and exciting if they've been trying to track our schedule. I know it always is for me when I'm like, oh yeah, we're podcasting this week. What do you know?
That's right.
Apologies for the volatility in the schedule, but here we are again. We just recorded a week ago. And last week, of course, was a very exciting one where we took a detour, talked to our friend Hakan about characters and casting.
That's right.
And now we're getting back on track, talking about story and scripts.
That's it.
And this is session 34 of season 5, covering episode 10. And if that's too confusing, we're talking about Aredhel and journey that she goes on. And more importantly, Fingolfin's vision, which Corey and I do not remember the contents of.
That's right. So so we have a really interesting combination in this episode, right? On the one hand, this episode contains the largest quantity of straight out of the book material, I think, of any episode we've done all season long. Right. I mean, the Aredhel's return to Gondolin, we're going to be reading out of the Silmarillion for the script not really, because of course but anyway, we're following that really, really closely. And then the other half of the episode is the stuff that is most far out there compared to the text, where we've gone sort of furthest away in an attempt to try to get at some of the things, of course, that are happening in the text and to develop some of the characters. But certainly, some of the stuff with most backing of the text and least backing of the text, and so it's a fascinating episode this time. By the way, one comment I wanted to make about the casting thing from last time, I have to admit, and so this is for Hakan, who I know isn't listening live, but Hakan, when you do listen to this, the Halath casting is growing on me. I have to admit, and in part that was because, I've mentioned several times that I've been reading Unfinished Tales, and I just last night read the essay on the Druidine, which of course talks a lot about the people of Halath, because of course the people of Halath were the ones who were really close with the Druidine, and rereading that, and just after having done that casting episode, reading Tolkien talking about the people of Halath, and he not just mentions, but emphasizes several times how short they were. They were really short. I mean, the Druidine are super short. They're between hobbits and men. I mean, they are completely differently proportioned, than most other people. And the people of Halath were taller than they were, but not all that much. So, the idea of our 5 foot, one Halath that we cast is growing on me. I mean, I will admit that because of her stature as, warrior, queen with indomitable will, I've always pictured her as physically imposing and tall, especially since, of course, it's kind of a thing, right? I mean, it's kind of a pretty big correlation in Tolkien between leadership and stature and height, right? I mean, the tallest dude in the crowd is almost always the king or the leader. I mean, that's very, very common in Tolkien's world. And so I think that's another thing that kind of subconsciously always made me, and since she is such a dominating figure, I'd always pictured her as, so I was totally picturing casting, a very, very large woman for Halath. And so it was one of the things that I was still kind of chewing on when we finished the casting session last time, was this idea of this, this small, relatively slender Halath that we had cast. But after the essay on the Druidine helped me to come to grips with that, because again, Tolkien was emphatic about how short the Haladin were. So I'm okay, all right, fine. And obviously Hurin gets the short genes from there. I mean, that's very clear. But anyway, so I just wanted to mention that to Hakan, if you're listening, I am now happier than I was before. I've wrapped my mind around it. It took me a little while to adjust my mental picture, but I can get behind this mental picture. And in some ways, actually, it's kind of cool. In some ways, I really kind of like the fact that if like from the outside, when you see the Holodene, like when you like come into a Holodene camp, to some extent, if your first impression is like, wow, these people are not very impressive or intimidating, right? That's kind of fitting, right? I mean, that's the impression. Like, certainly that's what like Beleg and Thingol are thinking, right? I mean, if Thingol of all people, right, the tallest of all of them, meets Holothen, meets the Holodene and is like, who are these mortals around my knees? Like, I can't keep track of them. They're so short, right? Like, the extent to which he's going to be looking down on them physically, and of course it's kind of nice actually for that to track in that way, and therefore, having first readjusted my mental picture of Haleth to then go back and kind of reimagine my way through the plot that we gave to Haleth, right, and imagining her surprising everyone, right? Imagining like, Caranthir coming upon, Haleth and these other short, unimpressive, ill-armed people and being like, dude, you guys seriously held off those orcs? I mean, again, it fits. It's really nice. Again, Thingol and Beleg meeting them and being like, what on earth? That's really nice. Them, ambushing Tevildo and killing Tevildo and Beleg being like, are you serious right now? Right? I like it. It's great. In some ways, it does actually, I've convinced myself that it works even better than having, like a 6'3" Haleth or something like that. So anyway, Thingol would be looking down.
You're on board.
I'm on board. I mean, he'd be looking down on a 6'3" Haleth anyway, but still, we might as well lean into that effect, I think. But yeah, Julie says the lack of height would also emphasize the childlikeness of the Holodene compared to the elves. Yeah, exactly. And it tracks with like they're going to be and they're going to remain primitive in comparison to the elves. I mean, even like that's one of the things that we were emphasizing, Marie, even in the Andreth episode, right? When Andreth comes up, the comparative primitiveness of them, and their contentment to rest there, right? That it's one of the things I liked about that episode. Like, yeah, we don't have all your fancy technology. No, I'm not literate. You have a problem with that? Like, this is the way we live and we're okay with it. I like it. Anyway, so I thought it was, that was pretty cool. Okay. So, great. Anyway, so sorry. That's been on my mind. Wanted to share that in response to last week. But before we go too much further and start arguing with Marie, start a cordial and convivial discussion of episode 10. And I'm mostly teasing Marie now. Quick announcements. Our biggest announcement this week is regional moots. So we had Myth Moot, and Myth Moot was awesome, as I was talking about last week. And now it is officially, now that Myth Moot is done, it is officially open season on regional moots. We are really looking forward to a full year of regional moots. We're in the middle of planning 10 or 11 or 12 moots this year. It's going to be really cool. We're still not sure about international moots, whether or not we want to go and do our Europe moot again. We had plans to do Dragon Moot in Wales last year, and we would like to try that again. We were all scheduled to do Nippon Moot in Japan before we had to cancel that, and we'd really like to revisit that one. We were planning to do Maple Moot in Toronto, so the plans for all three of those are like still there, and we're ready to revive them. But international travel is uncertain. I can't even get into Canada yet, so we're not planning those anytime soon. So people always ask me about those. I have no active plans because we have to wait until travel things change a little bit more. But I am still hopeful that maybe by the spring of next year. So we're not planning on doing any international moots here in during the calendar year 2021. Maybe in the spring, early summer next year, maybe early next fall. We'll do them as soon as we can, but we can start planning domestic moots. So we're definitely looking to do not only the same round of moots that we did before, San Francisco Bay Area, Southern California down by Dave, Orlando, Texas, Middle Moot out in Iowa, New England Moot here is going to be our very first one, probably the last Saturday of September. So we're not only going to be doing all of those, we're also definitely going to be adding a few. We're going to be adding Buckeye Moot in Ohio. That's certainly going to happen. And we're going to be doing, and we're planning right now. I'm pretty sure this is going to happen. But we're planning to add one out west, in Salt Lake City. So I'm interested. I'm still interested to add one in the Pacific Northwest as well. It's like one of our biggest like holes in the country that I would still like to cover. But we don't have that one yet. So anyway, that's the biggest thing. So I would just say for those who are listening, if you are interested in being involved in helping to plan one of our regional moots, if you want to join one of our regional moot planning team, we have really good support for our volunteers there. We have our moot in a box that we have things pretty well scripted. What we mostly need are people who can be, boots on the ground to help us find places to be and stuff, and, help us plan like what we want to do, themes and discussions and things like that. It's we can help walk everybody through that, but we do need, in order to make a moot happen in different places, we do need volunteers. So if you think you might be interested in helping to be on one of our moot planning teams, then let us know. Send us an email at info@signumu.org, and we can connect you with our events team. So anyway, that is our main announcement. And of course, Signum clubs are continuing this summer. Absolutely. Our clubs program is really exciting, and we're going to be expanding it as we head into the fall. We have a bunch of new language offerings that we are working on. We have a bunch of things. We're going to be offering things like translation club in New Testament Greek, and conversation club in Japanese and German, and a bunch of other languages this fall. So in addition, of course, to our book clubs and creative writing clubs, which are already up and running. So that is pretty exciting. Anyway, so that is what's going on. Those are our announcements. And now, let us get back to our discussion. So the title of episode 10, I like to think about the title for a second when we begin, is Bound Together. That is an interesting title. Bound Together, which of course suggests, a play on words in multiple directions, right? We have, of course, Aredhel and Maegwyn bound out together for Gondolin, right, along with Eol, whom they don't know is with them, as well as Eol's. It also seems to anticipate to some extent Eol's words to Maegwyn, right, that their fates are bound together as well, which I kind of like. The way that play. I like the way that title kind of sort of frames the A-plot in that way, right? Aredhel and Maegwyn bound together for Gondolin at the beginning, and then Eol and Maegwyn bound together in cursed death and infamy at the end. So that's fun. Of course, in the B plot we have the weddings, right? So we have that kind of binding together in the weddings, and I really like, by the way, one of my favorite parts of this episode is the way in which the kind of connection, not exactly parallel, because it's not a parallel. It's not just like a kind of a forced parallel, but the kind of overlay of the marriage between the two houses, right? The house of Hador and the Haladin, and the Adain and the Eldar, right? We've got like them kind of like thinking about their relationship together, and how that works, and how that's going to work, especially since it's a fascinating element, I think, of the B plot, the C plot, I guess, primarily, which is we to this in the season so far, like the first 9 episodes to some extent, there are like different phases of like the courtship phase of humans and elves, right? Like them meeting each other and getting to know each other and overcoming initial obstacles and settling in and like deciding what's going to be. And now, like, you know, at this point, we're well into this, right? We're like a generation into this, and there's now the question of like, you know, how's this relationship going to go on, right? You know, how is, you know, now that we have established a good status quo, but like, what does status quo even mean when it's related, you know, to men compared to what it is with elves? We've already seen, of course, in the House of Beor, a certain amount of that kind of you know, longitudinal changes, right, and similarities and differences. So we've already had that to some extent, but we get sort of another angle on it with Fingolfin and Fingon up there. Fun to see Fingon himself, who was differently from Finrod, though equally to Finrod, the most gung-ho of all of the Noldor about establishing these relationships with humans, and to see even Fingon being like, yeah, I'm not really quite sure what to do now, right? Like, okay, so now they're here, and but it's you know, even Fingon seems to acknowledge that there's some weirdness to that relationship. You know, there's still sort of strain. So again, I as I said, I really liked the overlay of the wedding feast and the contemplation of the relationship between elves and men. I thought that worked really, really well. And we're going to not talk about the frame, right? We're saving the frame. That's the plan, right? We're going to do a whole frame thing later on. By the way, like just today, like literally in the last hour and a half, I was reading the passage in Unfinished Tales, which is our like explicit justification for the Incanus plot, right? The one where the time, the earlier time. Now I'm forgetting already whether it's earlier or later. I think it was earlier, when Tolkien does explicitly say that Gandalf may very well have explored Harad. So, like, there we are. The whole frame. Almost the whole frame. Not quite. Sauron is the meaning for the season, but I think it was implied. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's what Tolkien had in mind.
Yeah, I think we've clearly uncovered his the obvious unspoken intention of that passage. I think. Yeah. That's. Hang on, wait. No. I think I'm gonna stop playing the "Let me see how uncomfortable I can make Marie" game, and instead just move on. So, okay, let us dig in to our 3 plots. Aredhel and Maeglin traveling to Gondolin being the A plot, the meeting of the 3 houses and the weddings being the B plot, and Fingolfin and the siege and the vision being the C plot. Okay, yeah. Aredhel's death. So this part, I think, is clearly the least controversial part of the entire episode, right? As I was so, let me ask the question this way, Marie. Were there what parts of the version in this of the text in the story were you feeling we most need to amplify? Because again, it stays very close to the version in the story. Were there parts of the, you know, in thinking about the scene by scene adaptation of the version of the Return to Gondolin story in the text? Were there parts of that were particularly challenging, that we felt like, you know, we had we would have some challenges to meet? Seriously, I can't even remember a whole scene or a whole section of an episode that was like more straightforwardly following the text in like the last 2 or 3 seasons, frankly. I mean, I have to go pretty far back to find anything like this.
Right. This part is very closely from the book. So When we were discussing it, there were a few things we did have to work out, and one of them is that we wanted Myglin to be the point of view character.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously, there would be some reason to try to make it Aredhel, but she doesn't quite see the story the whole way through.
Right,
So
right. If it were from her point of view, the scene would come to a sudden and unsatisfying end. Yeah, yeah.
right. So it's difficult to have the point of view character die within the episode.
Right.
So for that reason, primarily, it had to be Myglin. But we still wanted Aredhel to have some agency in what was happening. We didn't want her to be passive. So we didn't
Right.
want it to be like Myglin says, "All right, time to go to Gondolin, Mom," and then drags her there, and then she dies. So we were trying to avoid that. So
Okay.
Myglin's the point of view character, but Aredhel is the one instigating the now's the time we should go, and this is what we should do.
Okay, so that was one of the first largest changes, right? Aredhel's initiation of that. Now, so do we see Aredhel? So just to kind of pause there for a second, do we see Aredhel? Because we've done a lot of work, getting into Aredhel's head and her agency, right, from well before this, leading up through, especially, one of the big questions that we were preparing for and that we attempted to answer earlier on is, why does she leave Gondolin? Because we were dissatisfied with the idea that she was just bored or something like that, right? So how... I agree. Sorry. Whew. I agree this is important for her to choose, right? For this to be, how does her choice to return to Gondolin fit in both with her kind of earlier frame and choices and mindset, and willfulness and all those other things that we saw, strength of will and everything in her, and how does and how also does it fit with Eol? This is the sort of the moment of her final rebellion against Eol. She's out. She's done. She just means to turn her back on him forever, basically.
Right. The confrontation between her and Eol had reached the point where she's done with him a long time ago. However,
Right.
they have a child, and she's definitely not done with her child. So the only thing that's been keeping her in Nan Elmoth is definitely not what drove her out of Gondolin. It's not her mission. It's not her ideals. It's not her love of Eol, because those have all gone away now.
Right.
It's she wants to be there for Myglin. So this is a moment where Eol has gone off to Nogrod to see the dwarves, and Myglin didn't go with him. And she asks him why, and he starts talking about how he can't, there's nothing for him there, that he can't learn anything more from the dwarves, and Eol's not the hotshot that he thinks he is, and all, basically Myglin deconstructs Eol's, the whole situation with Eol. So when she sees that, it's like, great, you don't actually need your dad, let's go. She realizes that Myglin is old enough, that he has reached a point where he can choose and he can make a decision.
Right.
And therefore she has something to offer him, and offers him Gondolin.
And so in that way, yeah. And in that way, that is a really good, because it is initiated by Myglin in the text, right? So it is an interesting way for us to kind of preserve that on the one hand, right? Because his choice, she is respecting his choice, right? She's not going to just take him away from his father against his will, right? Against Myglin's will, Right,
yeah,
exactly. She could have done that when he was a baby.
Picked it up and left, but
right, exactly. But yeah. So no, I think that's a really good way to think about it. And as Nick says, it is of course in many ways an admission of failure. So it is clearly a humbling moment, and even a choice of humility. You think about the ways in which Aredhel has been, or at least has wanted to be, a sort of mover and shaker among the Noldor, right? And so for her to return, ultimately seeking refuge, right? That's what she's doing, right? She's she started off season 5 by saying to Turgon, we shouldn't be just hiding from the world in here, right? And now she's returning to hide from Eol in Gondolin. So it is humiliating in that way. And but I think that's kind of a good place. I don't think that makes her weak. I think that we can do that to show how it makes her stronger. Like she's willing to, like she needs this, and it would be merely stubborn for her to be like, well, I'm not going to return to Gondolin because then I'd be eating my words.
Yes, she has changed in how she views Gondolin and how she views Turgon, and
right.
We were hoping to have some acknowledgement of that in their reunion, although they don't have time to like sit down and talk about everything.
Right.
So
kind of distracted by the whole Eol thing.
Yes, there's a bigger issue going on, but the goal was to have there be some exchange of words where Aredhel expresses to him something along the lines of recognizing that his vision and how he's been carrying out his vision is maybe not as fruitless as she had thought.
Right.
Like she sees the value in what he's doing. And
She started off thinking it was just a waste, right? Like where this is but now she sees like, yeah, actually, I can now see circumstances under which there being a refuge in which, elves oppressed in the lands outside might be able to seek. And that comes in handy. Maybe it's not such a bad idea. Yeah, I think that's great. I think that, but again, but she wasn't wrong either. It's not
Turgon's going to have opportunities to think back to her point of view in the future. Definitely.
And of course, and this is one of the things that I liked most about how we set this up at the beginning of the season. We will still have Idril to be the voice of that, because she was in sympathy, not in like completely, she didn't like leave with Aredhel, but she and Aredhel were close enough that Idril will still be there to be able to be the voice of Aredhel's perspective later on. And so yes, we will get plenty of times to acknowledge that she wasn't wrong, and she's not been disproved by all of this stuff, but yet she certainly will have changed her opinion of Turgon's thing.
Right. We wanted their reunion to be as joyful as possible, so that when she suddenly dies, it's sad.
Yep. Okay, no, that's great. I really like that. Tell me, in the outline, the conversation between Eol and Curufin was really brief. Was like the description of their conversation was really brief in the outline. Was that because we're thinking mostly of following pretty closely to the text?
Exactly. There didn't need to be much more than what's already there.
Right.
For either of those characters, so we were just like, yeah, do that.
that's one of those scenes that it seems like could like really drag the episode a little bit.
We talked about if we wanted anything in particular to happen with it, so we did suggest changes, and then we discarded those changes. We kind of just went back to whatever's in the text is good.
Right.
There was at least a thought of introducing Pelegorm and Huan into the scene.
We haven't had Huan in quite a while.
Right, like just to include them, but they weren't really doing anything, so it wasn't.
Yeah. Is there anything, thinking about the scene in the text, we of course have added a good deal of context for Curufin, right? Hi, Wally. Good night. We've added a lot of context for Curufin and what's going on with the Feanorians, right? So that's one way in which I think, just like if we went line for line with the dialogue out of the text there, one of the things that I was kind of doing when I was reading that part was just sort of running through that dialogue in my head and asking myself, okay, like how does this sound coming out of the mouths of our characters, right, that we've been developing, and given the context and the story that we've had them participating in so far. And when I did that imaginative exercise with the Eol Curufin conversation, I was like, Yeah, Eol, it's perfect. Like, it fits exactly what we've said. But with Curufin, it's not that it doesn't fit him at all. Like, you won't have to change any of it. But that was one place where I was like, well, we know more about like what Curufin is up to and what his perspectives are likely to be and what the implications might be for the whole kind of like political situation in the siege between the Feanorians and their other Noldor neighbors there, between the Feanorians and Thingol. I mean, of course, in the book we already have. We know the eventual conflict between the Feanorians and Doriath, so we have some, if there's some like foreshadowing perhaps of vague things to come. But anyway, so did you have any thoughts about how we might want to or even what impact, even if it doesn't change the actual scene itself, just to taking a moment to think about the kind of impact that this is going to have, like moving forward with Curufin, and how this is going to impact where the Feanorians generally and Curufin specifically are going to be after this, because it's pretty isolated in the book. That exchange is pretty isolated in that sense.
Right. This is a kind of an odd scene in that Curufin is not someone who has had an opportunity to do much on his own before this. Mm-hmm. So like this is the one thing he does before we see him acting later.
Right.
The telling thing is you're not supposed to just steal people's daughters and marry them. Is like, yeah, Curufin, you're not.
Yeah, that would be a horrible thing to do, Curufin. Meanwhile, Curufin takes notes like, stealing people's daughters and marrying them. There's a crime I have not yet committed against my brethren. Okay, I note to self, right? That's now on my bucket list. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is that impact of that line later on with the whole Luthien situation in Celeborn. Yeah. And so we'll have to consider, but I assumed that this conversation would impact how we portray that more than the other way around.
Right.
So it was more like, well, make him say it and then deal with the fallout later.
Right. Certainly that kind of payoff of the conversation. It's a next season question, but there will be some payoff. And so we should remember to have somebody quote that, say that back almost exactly. I mean, it would be pretty funny, wouldn't it? If like the emissaries from Doriath say almost exactly the same words that Curufin said to Eol.
We spent more time trying to figure out what Curufin knew about Aredhel's situation.
Right.
And therefore what his reaction to this would be, because she had gone to his lands before she went to Nan Elmoth, but didn't see him.
Right.
And
yeah, that's a question that Ilana's asking here. How would they know? Yeah.
Right. And she's leaving Nan Elmoth, going towards his lands, through his lands actually, to get back to Gondolin. And that's why Eol assumes that she's there with Curufin.
Right.
Eol assumes that Curufin has spoken with her,
right,
but he hasn't. And that's where it's like, okay, well, what does Curufin know in this conversation, and what is he just inferring based on what Eol is saying to him?
Right.
Right. So that was why it was kind of important to start some of those rumors earlier, where the people of Curufin's land knew that Aredhel traveled with some dwarves to Nan Elmoth, and then there was that rumor that Eol had this Noldor wife that the dwarves know about. So like, you get the impression that Curufin could have heard enough to have figured out that Aredhel is in Nan Elmoth. And
that would certainly, that would certainly simplify things a little. Yeah. It would simplify things a little bit, because you got to think because Eol pulls out he calls him kinsman and stuff, right? And you think that Curufin would be like, what are you on about? Why are you even, that doesn't even make any sense. He would just be puzzled, and he doesn't express puzzlement in the book. So how do we avoid him just being puzzled? And so, those rumors, and he's, goodness knows, Curufin is smart enough to put it together when he hears him say that, to make that quick to that quick conclusion.
Right.
But they probably would. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Was making sure that Curufin had a basis for saying the things he was saying, and that it didn't completely come out of the blue.
Right. Right. No, that's good. I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so Nick is now saying, or is taunting me. Not exactly, but he says that we spent a lot more time trying to figure out why Curufin doesn't follow him. Yeah, but okay, now I want to know. Why doesn't Curufin follow him? It's a great question, right?
Right. 'Cause the part of Eol is going to track them through Nandan Gorthab and all the way to Gondolin. Curufin apparently is patrolling the borders of his land looking for Aredhel too. So why does he just say, carry on, Eol, and let him go? And the implication was supposed to be that he doesn't think that Eol has any idea where Aredhel's going either.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't think that following Eol will lead him to Aredhel.
Okay.
And so he gives him that warning of like, follow her and die, dude.
Right. And
then
if
he just leaves it at that.
And maybe are we assuming that he Curufin is assuming that Eol's gonna heed his warning?
No.
No. He's pretty sure Eol's not going to.
One of those prophetic taunts of, you are getting exactly what is coming to you.
Right. I am warning you against this. Not only suspecting you're not going to believe, but fully counting on the fact that you're not going to listen to me. Yeah, okay. No, that sounds very Curufin in both directions. So, okay. So he believes that Eol is headed off to his death, so he's not worried about Eol, right? Because he's already prophesied his doom, and so that's taken care of. Why doesn't he go to try to find? I mean, he's friends with Aredhel, right?
Right. So he is looking himself. He just doesn't necessarily think that Eol is a clue.
Right.
Right. Aredhel left Eol, so it's like, well, you know.
Does he, Curufin, know that she's gone off into Nandan Gorthab?
No.
No. Okay.
There was. Aredhel was spotted in his lands by one of his people, so he's hanging out, seeing if he can find any evidence of her or news of her. But he didn't get the news that she went through Nandan Gorthab.
Right, and as Alana points out, everybody generally thinks that Gondolin is somewhere in the south of Beleriand. So, if both Eol and Curufin are both leaping to the logical conclusion that if she did not come to seek her friends the Feanorians, she has most likely attempted to return to Gondolin. Curufin, if he doesn't, not knowing where Gondolin is, might suspect that means that she's turned. So he would perhaps have active, or believe he has active reasons to suspect that she's not gone to Nandan Gorthab. It would be logical for him not to conclude that in that case. Have we haven't seeded any of those rumors, have we? About Gondolin being in the south?
No, we haven't had too many people talk about, hey, Gondolin, yeah. I wonder where that is. Right. We'll probably do that a bit more in season 6 and 7. Yeah. 7 definitely.
Yeah, 7 definitely. Okay. All right.
We didn't get around to it.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. That's fine. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Responding to a comment on YouTube. No, we are not officially part of the Amazon show. It works the other way around, you see. The Amazon people are following in our footsteps. We've been doing this for like 6 years, right? Clearly, I think my personal theory is that Jeff Bezos is a fan of ours. And so seeing Silmfilm and what a wonderful project this is, he was like, I need to invest $500 million in exactly this kind of thing. And so he went on. That's my personal theory. No evidence to support it, except the obvious fact that they're doing exactly, what we've already been doing for 5 years. So there we go. I'm joking almost entirely about almost all of that, by the way, except for the fact that we've been doing this for 6 years, which is fact. This is, Marie, you just calculated, this is the 140th episode of Silmfilm, right? Stretching back to, good grief, what was it, 2013 maybe?
I think you announced it in 2015, I believe.
2015 was it? Okay, anyway, yeah. Ages ago, in short. 6 years, hey, just like I said. Yeah, that's there we are. Okay, so all right, other things that I wanted, other kind of moments here that I wanted to sort of lean on. Eol follows them. How? He tracks them?
Right. He knows that Aredhel came through Nandangortheb before she came to this
Right.
forest, because I mean
Right.
he's been living with her for the last 50 years, so he
Right.
knows a bit about her, and she's never revealed the location of Gondolin.
But he knows
she
that's the
didn't hide
direction she
everything.
came from. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're going to show him chasing after her a few times, but we're not going to know how close he is until the scene where they release the horses because they're about to go through, and the horses neigh, and we see Eol hear and respond to that sound, and we realize he's right there. So we're not going to know how close or how he's tracking them really, other than just show a couple scenes, because he's not going to talk to anyone. Right.
You mean we're not going to have scenes of like Eol having a dialogue with his horse to like explain the exposition that we need? Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine.
So it's kind
Also, don't we think he probably would have gotten some details out of her about sort of at least like the general direction to head in?
I think that she knows to keep that a secret. So she's probably been very particular to not say things that were specifically about the location of Gondolin, but she couldn't hide that she's been through Nandangortheb before. Like that's what I mean. Like he knows enough about her to
I would think without even like following doing some like Aragorn level tracking, I think even without that, he's got to at least would have an idea of like which direction to point him to ride in for at least a good long while.
He would at the very least he would have known when she showed up that she showed signs of having been traveling through Nandangortheb for a long time, right? I mean, it was, so he would, so that would explain why he goes from the meeting with Curufin straight to Nandangortheb and just rides as fast as he can through Nandangortheb trying to catch up with them. Because in that sense, he doesn't have to like follow their trail. He does know the direction, but it's gonna be luck, that's going to, and of course ultimately the horses that are going to lead him to know when to stop going through Nandangortheb, right, when they've gotten to the entrance.
Right. And I mean, we've shown Eol use magics before, and we've shown him be very possessive and very suspicious of her.
Yes.
So if he's just magically able to follow her and we don't explain why, people can reach their own conclusions about how he did that.
I kind of like the mystery of it, because I mean, seriously, who knows what Eol is capable of? I mean, he clearly has power of some kind, right, and is very secretive about it. So yeah, no, I really like that element. The way in which he is just this like shadowy figure who is following, and you don't know exactly how close he is, and you don't know exactly how he's following them, but yes, one can easily speculate that they are kind of moving like somehow he's managing it, and that just seems to me really, really fitting. Okay, so tell me more about the scene, the big scene, right? The confrontation with Eol and Turgon and Aredhel and the javelin and everything else, right? Again, like mechanically, we're following there's nothing. I didn't notice anything that we changed, like any detail that the text says that we took out or something like that.
Right. That again was pretty much a preserved scene from the book, because why not? The only changes would have been the reunion between Aredhel and Turgon. Anything that they said before Eol's brought in could be based on the story that we built up in Gondolin prior to her leaving. But once Eol's brought in, it's the text from the book playing out. I mean, that's that theme.
Right.
So to make adaptation choices, we put that into the aftermath. When Aredhel is sick and they're trying to heal her, and Idril sitting by her side, and Myglin's there, and Turgon comes to see her, and the news isn't good, and Turgon pulls Miglin aside. And
Yes.
he's like, look, what is the deal here? Because, like, what happened? You know, he knows Aredhel, and the way she reacted when Eol showed up, he's like, that is not normal. This is not how people react when they're reunited with their husband. So, like, clearly something is going on.
Right. If the poison javelin didn't give us a pretty clear idea that this was dysfunctional, yeah, no, I agreed. Like, that only proves that Eol is like, you know, a freak. But yeah, him trying to understand Aredhel and her whole story, basically, right? You know, how things got to that point.
Miglin has the chance here to say what he thinks about his parents' relationship. And he does the thing where he says something that is like this much positive about his dad. Like, yeah, that's who he is. Right. And Turgon's like, got it.
Yeah.
So Miglin's failure to defend his father there, which is obviously a very deliberate choice on Miglin's part, shapes Turgon's decision of what to do about Eol. Because Aredhel was kind of pleading for mercy on some level, right?
Right.
And that seems normal. There have been no executions yet among the
I was gonna get to that, but let's hang on a second before we get there, because I got some other things I want to ask about before we get to because the execution is the big question, right? And I wanna end with that one as far as the A plot is concerned. Before we get there, non-verbal cues, right? Dialogue is pretty much the same, but we have a whole bunch of non-verbal activity going on at that scene. Even, I mean, and I don't even just mean the hurling of javelins, right? I mean, Turgon and Aredhel meet and see each other. What happens? Run and embrace? What's his reaction? So he's surprised. It's like she's returned from the dead, right? He had reason to believe she was dead, and now here she is again. So we do we have him running to embrace her, and her? How do we, you know, what instructions do we give the actors there for their reunion?
Yes, it's supposed to be that he's shocked because he thought she was dead for years.
Right.
She has this is a resurrection scene as far as he's concerned.
Right. Right.
So the joy of the meeting is supposed to be very high, with lots of surprise, lots of unexpected catastrophe kind of things going on. And then Eol's brought in. And the boy, like, and wait, like, and you've a kid. I have a son. Yeah. Right. Like, where did he come from?
Right. An almost fully grown kid. Right. I mean, yeah.
Turgon is just very surprised.
Very surprised.
And doesn't know what to think of any of it.
And so his initial reaction to Miglin is going to be contextualized by the joy. Like, Miglin's going to be a part of the miracle, right, to him.
Right.
Okay.
Aredhel has returned to him with this miracle child.
And so, therefore, clearly setting up his response to Miglin after her death, right? Miglin is now what remains of the miracle of Aredhel's. You know, Aredhel may be dead, and that is a horrible tragedy, but of course, he's already mourned her, right? So, of course, he's mourning her a second time, but he has long grown accustomed to the idea that she is dead. But now the miracle is that, like, his dead sister, he now has a son from his dead sister, right? Like, from after she was dead. I mean, like, again, it's like, so again, the context in which I think this is going to be really important for to establish this as the basis of Turgon's relationship with Miglin, and even can help to explain what I think is going to have to be a certain degree of blindness towards Miglin later on, right? I don't mean like the full-blown betrayal thing, right? But I mean, Idril's creeped out and is going to become increasingly creeped out as time goes on. Turgon has to be some level of oblivious about that, right? I mean, there has to be And so this, I think, in other words, there needs to be a reason why he doesn't take his daughter's side. Why he is not sensitive enough to his daughter to like catch on to her creeping, her the way that she's all skeezed out by this guy, and like he needs to be oblivious to that, and this would give a reason, right? Maiglin still is like in Turgon's mind still part of that eucatastrophe of Aredhel's return. So okay, so we need to make sure we leave enough time before Eol's dragged in, right? We need to leave enough time for the joyful reunion and the joyful greeting of Maiglin, right? We need to really root and establish that. But speaking of things that need to be rooted and established before we get distracted by the whole Eol situation, Idril. So Idril and Maiglin, what are the instructions we give to those actors for non-verbally for this scene?
Right. So I know that your interpretation of Maiglin's character has been that his whole vision of why Gondolin is worth something to him is because Turgon has a daughter but not an heir, and like he wanted to meet her, so he should be interested in meeting her, and she doesn't necessarily notice him at first. I mean, any more so than the Return of Aredhel. And like, why? Aredhel has a kid now.
Right.
So
right.
Idril is just happy and surprised like her dad at first. They notice each other in a scene that we can actually show at the deathbed.
Right.
Because Idril's there with Aredhel, and so is Maiglin. So if Maiglin is maybe distracted from his dying mom to notice the pretty girl, that doesn't say anything good about Maiglin.
Yeah, he's standing in his mom's deathbed staring at Idril.
Yeah.
Right. So there's
Right.
an opportunity for some creepy awkwardness there that doesn't have to be too overblown, and it is merely creepy because it's in a
because of the context, right?
Yeah,
and it does provide us with a pretty understated way to show the like inequality of their attention, right? If they're both at the deathbed of Aredhel and his attention is divided between his dying mom and the pretty girl, and she's like 100% focused on Aredhel and barely, I mean, it's not like she, disregards him or doesn't acknowledge him, but she is not, looking out of the corner of her eye at Maiglin. She's focused entirely on Aredhel right there, and so we can that will allow us to show both from the start he is much more focused on her than she on him, and also that like there's something not quite right there. It should make it, I think we can introduce a little discomfort without making it too awkward, because like he should not look skeezy, right? I mean, we're not going to introduce that kind of an element. Certainly not at the beginning. I mean, by the time we get towards the end, by the time Tuor is there, right? His attentions to Idril can be more actively uncomfortable.
Right. He can get a little bit more desperate when he realizes she's actually interested in someone else.
Right. Right.
As long as she shows no interest in anyone else, he can kind of go along with the status quo, thinking, well, someday
right.
she will notice me.
He's told. I mean, maybe
maybe sort of at some point, it doesn't have to be in this episode, but he overplays his hand and is just like a little too creepily interested, and sort of detects that she's noticing or someone's noticing, and then disciplines himself. Right. And then and that discipline doesn't falter until he has competition.
Because he's totally going to play the long game. I mean, he's settled in for the long game. It's not like he's it is not like he's going to be so foolish or so impetuous as to hurl himself at her in the first 5 minutes of their meeting. Like, there's no reason to do that. They're both elves, for crying out loud. And he's smart enough to know that would be, even though he's not even fully grown yet, we still have him an older and teenager, right? But still, nevertheless, even as a teenager, he knows well enough and of course, for people listening, don't forget when I say teenager, I mean parallel. He's not actually, he's, what is he, 35-ish is where we put him?
51.
51. Oh, he's 51 years of age then. Wait, what? It's on the slide. Yeah, there it is. Right, of course. There it is. Yeah, it's under the tree. I missed it. Yes. Yeah, he's 51. But he's barely of age. He's barely of age. So like he's just turned 18 in elf terms, basically.
Exactly.
And,
he thinks he's grown, and most other people do not.
Right. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and I mean, and she's way older than he is. I mean, obviously, age difference among the Eldar very different from age difference among humans for obvious reasons. So that's not itself an obvious problem. But so again, certainly in this moment, from Idril's point of view, this is not even like she wouldn't even see him as on her level, if you see what I mean. I mean, it's
Idril would be one of the people viewing him as still a child.
Yeah, definitely. She would view him as a child. And not to mention, she also views him, for obvious reasons, as her cousin, right? So, so yet another reason why she would not be thinking in that way. But okay, all right. So I like the deathbed thing. That's a really good opportunity. So we won't at the first meeting, we won't be doing much. If anything, we'll do, because Miglin is our point of view character, so we may get a noticing of Idril. Right, because he's been looking forward to this. Right, this has been one of the main things he's focused on.
Right, he can notice her, but if we want to introduce the creepy element, it takes a little more. And the focus of the greeting scene is Turgon.
The eucatastrophe and the joy. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so one more nonverbal instructions to actors thing. Aredhel and Eol, when Eol is brought in chains, how do we instruct those two? We've got Turgon is relatively easy here, right? Because he's joyful, right? So he is already, and we see this in the text, he's all ready to welcome her husband, right? Oh, hey, you must be Aredhel's, like, she's got a kid, so I'm not surprised to find a husband, right? How wonderful. And here we all are together. I mean, you can clearly see that's the direction that Turgon is thinking when Eol is brought in, right? Understandably, you're being, dragged in, at least metaphorically, in chains because, like, that's the law and everything, and that's what we're supposed to do to strangers who are caught at the gates and stuff. But hey, it's all good. Here we are. But Eol and Aredhel, what's going on with them?
Aredhel's face when she sees him has to give away how much of a disaster this is. Right. And how she never wanted to see him here. Like, the whole reason Gondolin is safe is because it keeps people like him out. So
is she afraid? Does she show fear?
I think that's more the, like, when people, like, go pale suddenly for a second, like, I guess that is fear, but it's more of the shock and dread than
dread of, like, this is going to be horrible, like a horrible scene of one kind or another, one other species. It's not like she's afraid for herself. Like, she's not worried he's going to be able to do anything to her here in Gondolin.
No, right? But she didn't want him here. Right. Like, this is it's a disaster because this is not her plan. Yeah. He wasn't supposed to find them here.
Right. The best case scenario is that she's now going to have to live in Gondolin with Eol from now on, right? Like, that's the best case scenario here, and that's pretty bad.
Except there is a really nice opportunity here, because Turgon has rules in Gondolin, and one of those rules is that you do not leave. And Aredhel's had to put up with Eol's rules in Nan Elmoth for the last 50, 60 years. And suddenly Eol is being subjected to that same treatment of, oh yeah, you can't leave. You're going nowhere. Now that you're here, you stay forever. That's how this works.
Right.
And
so there's a certain element of satisfaction.
Yes. Yeah. I think Aredhel would be like, see? You meet my brother.
Right. She's looking back and forth between them, and she's getting out the popcorn, right? Like, oh, I can't wait to see how this plays. Yeah.
I think there's both. So like the dread of him being there, but also that comeuppance and superiority of how do you like it? You know,
Right.
she has to be feeling a little bit of that when she realizes that Eol does not like being Turgon's guest.
Right.
Yes.
I came into your domain and you've been claiming this mastery over me, and now you've come into my world, right? And my brother's world, and now you are subject to these laws. And so yeah, she didn't want this. Again, it's not like that's a happy situation at all. But that's why she's not afraid, right?
Right.
It's gonna, like, again, the best case scenario is that this is going to be awkwardness that won't end for centuries, right? That's the best case scenario, and she knows that. So she's not happy about this, but yeah, she's.
But it's a big city. Like they could just not see each other very often.
Right.
Like
Right.
there's other people here who aren't silent.
Right.
So
Right.
so even if she doesn't want him there, this is still much more freedom, and she's in charge. These are her people.
Right. Right.
So
she is standing in a position of strength and knows that she's standing in a position of strength, and would still, even in a sense, be like emotionally buoyed by the joyful meeting with her brother that has just been interrupted. That, of course, makes the shock more pronounced, right? When suddenly Eol comes in, and as Nick says, it's like seeing a ghost, right? When suddenly Eol pops up. But yeah, I mean, it's a complicated kind of reaction from her. Yeah. Now, how about Eol? What's going through Eol's mind as he's standing there? Indignation, obviously. He's been
he was not counting on the "I'm not in charge anymore" situation. Like, and he does not like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he goes other places, people usually fear him and respect him enough not to treat him this way. And he has to know that Aredhel's not going to really step in and defend him.
Yeah.
Especially when she starts getting the gleeful reaction to his discomfort. Like he's got to know that he doesn't have an ally,
right,
in the room. So someone with Eol's personality, when they are put in a difficult spot where they get called out and where they don't have the power that they're used to having and they don't have the respect they're used to getting, they tend to react very badly. Yeah. And they tend to lash out. Yeah. So the part where the next thing he does is pull out a poisoned javelin and try and stab his son to death is extreme, but not a huge surprise.
It's at least not a huge surprise that he's going to do something extreme, like an extreme reassertion of his control, desperate reassertion of his control, because he's so powerless, and that sense of powerlessness is going to drive him absolutely crazy. And so that he does something crazy, no shock.
Yeah. There was some discussion of like how premeditated is this? After all, a poison javelin, you had to put poison on it.
That was my next question.
Poison on you? Yeah.
And who carries a javelin under their cloak? I mean, like,
where did the javelin come from?
Can we talk about the javelin for a second? Right? Like, okay, so I understand, like, obviously you say the word javelin and the first thing I think of is Olympic track and field, right? That now, obviously it's not a javelin like that, right? I mean, like that. I distinctly remember the first mental picture I had. You know, I'm like, how did he even fit it under his cloak, right? But anyway, so
how did no one notice it?
Exactly right. They obviously did a really bad job of frisking Eol when they arrested him at the gates, right? They need better metal detectors at the gates of Gondolin, obviously. But so clearly the javelin, you know, what is called a javelin could be something significantly smaller, right? Possibly even something that could be kept like in his sleeve or something like that, right? Like, I'm imagining, basically, I'm thinking of like a very large dart rather than a big old javelin. It's not going to be like the kind of javelin that you'd throw 150 yards, right? This would be more like a short range, still at range, right? So it's not like a dagger that he's throwing, but it's still something that can conceal, either like up his sleeve, possibly occurs to me as a thing he could do. I could imagine a kind of throwing dart that you could like strap to your forearm or something, so that he could reach under his cloak and pull it out and throw it, and they would not have necessarily thought to. I mean, they're going to take any obvious weapons from him when he comes in, because they don't know who he is or what he is, right?
I mean, we would expect them to, because that's what guards do when they stop people, right? They,
right.
like you said, metal detectors, that's where our thoughts go. We're used to going through a checkpoint and having people pocket knives. So it seems a little odd, but he's also from a culture where they don't have metal detectors and they don't take your pocket knives. So, and
kinslaying is a pretty extreme thing. Like, one could go the other way around and say, what would they be afraid of? Like,
why would they strip search him? Obviously they didn't do that. Like that's not a So
especially if they have some prior knowledge about who he is and the fact that he's Aredhel's husband. It's like, you're not I mean, they are kind of dragging him in, but basically it's like, I think he'd be given the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Yes. And even thinking about even in the very much longer description that we get in the long tour story, right, when Tuor and Veronwe arrive at the gates, I don't think they get their weapons taken, do they?
I mean, granted, think about what Tuor's carrying. He's dressed in the suit of armor that got left in Nevra. So
what are you going to take, the prophesied sword that like was left for me in Nevrast, right? Because
I mean, we it is a fair point. We do see a recurring pattern here of extremely poor throne room security.
Poor throne room security.
Why are we dragging armed people into the throne room before the king, especially after this incident, when we should have learned that this is dangerous?
Right, exactly. But prior to this incident, so I mean, because there's prior to this incident, there's several potential answers to that, right? One is, again, this is apparently Aredhel's husband. Like, he's not a Noldo and he's pretty rude, but okay, he's Aredhel's husband. Why should we be afraid he's going to start chucking poison javelins at people? Like, it's not a thing you do. Who's done that? No one has ever done that, right? Besides which, like, paranoia, fearing assassination attempts against the king, like, that's not really a big thing, right? Like, do Noldor kings have bodyguards? Like, do they do that? I don't know that they do. Would they? I don't know that they do that. I mean, especially in Gondolin, for crying out loud, right? If there's a king in Middle Earth who does not need bodyguards standing on either side of his throne, it's Turgon, right? True. So I mean, so like the idea of that this is a massive security breach, as far as if anything, it makes his actual murderous attack more shocking, right? I mean, everyone should just be utterly shocked, not just by there's like several levels of shock. Like, he had a concealed weapon that he pulled out and attempted to use against another elf. Like, holy cow, who does that, right? Not even Feanor acted that way, right? I mean, it was, Feanor didn't just start slaughtering folks. He just stole their ships, right? And then, killed them when they tried to resist, mostly. Anyway, point is, like, the poison javelin thing out of nowhere, I'm chucking a poison javelin out of you, is beyond the pale that anyone has really experienced. That he's throwing it at his own son is like extra levels of unexpected weirdness that nobody would anticipate, right? But nevertheless, despite that, I still think it would be pretty odd if they're like, yeah, he came and he has this 4-foot javelin, but we're like, it's fine. You got your javelin. We'll let you bring your javelin. I mean, it would still just look weird for him to be coming in with, and it says it's under his cloak, so it's got to be small, or else it's just going to look odd. I mean, people are going to laugh when he pulls it out from under his cloak if it's too big. I mean, I'm sorry, like, that's just going to be comical on screen.
Right. No, we don't want that thing to be comical, of course. And so
Yeah.
I'm fine with it being a smaller than anticipated javelin. The whole point of it is that he had the murderous intent, and no one counted on that except for Aredhel, who reacts quickly enough to do something about it. Like everyone else, kind of just stands there in shock.
Yeah.
So even if there are guards, the guards
Yeah.
don't anticipate this, so they're just like, "What is this?"
Right. And there's two senses of that, right? She, unlike the guards, is not shocked when he does something not only crazy but violent, right? This is she reads it, right? But not only that, there is no one else besides Aredhel who would ever expect him to chuck it at Miglin, right? She anticipates his mind well enough to, because I mean, look, if you're pulling out a dart and throwing a dart at somebody, I mean, like as soon as he makes the movement, before he makes the movement, she's got to be in motion, right? So as like she's got to read it in his face. Like, so, I mean, I think we need this like nonverbal exchange where like we see by his face that he's made his mind up what to do. She sees in his face and knows what he's going to do as he's like reaching in his sleeve, right? And so she's already got to be like starting her leap in front of Miglin, right? Before he comes out and throws it. Because otherwise physically it's just not going to work. But I like that, right? I like the way in which we can show her anticipating this, because to everybody else it's going to seem really strange. Now, but here's the challenge. How do we make it not seem really strange to the viewers?
Right.
Why does he attack Miglin? What's going on in his head here, and how do we make it fit with what we've shown from him?
The part where she's feeling like she's in a good position and like the watching with popcorn part of the scene, and he's getting more and more distraught and disturbed.
And so he's got to be looking back and forth between Turgon and her, right? So he's assessing Turgon and the situation and what it's going to mean for him. And then he's looking at her and seeing in her face her confidence and her very understated enjoyment of his discomfort, right? And that's going to egg him on even more.
Yeah. So as that escalates, it reaches a point where he's done with this. He's not going to live this way. And like you said, she sees that. She reacts to that. So she stops being the, what can you possibly do? You're in my land now, to, oh no, don't you dare. And so she has that shift. So if we're seeing her reaction and we're seeing his, we can see where it's going off the rails.
So what it builds up to,
go ahead,
Dick.
Do we need to, I'm wondering if there's like extra work we need to do in this episode, or I guess even earlier, to like set up the idea that, and I think we've discussed this before, so I think we have done some of this, but like we need to set up the idea that like sort of possession of Miglin is important. And so because as you point out, Corey, so it's not just like, why is his reaction to, I don't like the deal I'm getting, I'm going to murder my son now. Right. Like we need to make it very clear, like maybe through the course of this episode, as he's chasing them, he keeps mentioning Miglin or something. And then when he first catches up to them, maybe one of the first things that he says to Aredhel is to, you know, kind of yell at her about taking Miglin away. But make it very clear that like his fixation is on Miglin.
We do have the scene very early on when he comes back from Nogrod and discovers them gone.
Yes.
With the silent servants. Like we talked about whether or not to show that, and we're like, yeah, let's show it. And so that moment when he discovers they're gone, he could say it like you're saying, I can't believe she took him from me, or something like that.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And that would kind of get that started. But we did establish in two separate earlier episodes that
The tug of
Aredhel
war.
and Eol are playing tug of war over their son.
Absolutely.
Right on.
Aredhel just won the tug of war.
Yep.
So
yes, if we have him verbalize that to the silent servants, like he says, he doesn't have to say much, because he wouldn't say much. They don't say anything, and he doesn't talk much at all. But he would utter a sentence, right? That would show that, right? That's how he's processing this, right? She thinks that she's won, like, you know, she's trying to take him from me, is she? You know, something along those lines, right? So that we're prepped for that.
Final action will make more sense.
Yeah, because even in the even in the text, right, the culmination of that emotional escalation, Marie, that you were describing within him, right, as he's going back from Turgon to Aredhel and seeing this progress, the climax of that is his appeal to Maegwyn, right? He is going to push all of his chips to the center, right? He asserts his independence of Turgon, right? I don't recognize your law. You can't control me. But it's clear that that's not going to pan out, right? So that's almost his last card, right? So when he appeals to Maegwyn and tries to command Maegwyn and calls Maegwyn to come to him, right? That's his last card, right? If if that fails, he has nothing. And as Ilana was pointing out, an abusive parent like that is, an abusive father like that who finds himself so utterly powerless, right? All of the power, he's used to being the one in charge. He's been the one in charge, for 50 years now, right? He has believed that he has had both of them under control. In different ways and to different extents, but he has been in charge, and now he's lost everything. Even Maegwyn himself, he can't even dominate Maegwyn anymore. He's lost Aredhel. That's obvious. That he would see in her, right? He would see her confidence, her satisfaction being on her home turf now. He would see this, that Turgon's laws, Turgon's attitude, Turgon's power. Here he is at the center of Turgon's power now, right? So he knows that he can't win this battle against Turgon, but he could still dominate Maegwyn. And then Maegwyn refuses. So if we show that, if we kind of emphasize that well enough, we show how if we lay the right kind of stress on that line, right, on his appeal to Maegwyn, and Maegwyn saying no, when he snaps, because it would be snapping, right? I mean, that is totally what happens there, is he snaps, right? And that when he snaps and lashes out, he does so against Maegwyn. We're not saying anything new. I mean, this is actually what the text describes, right? That is precisely that we're kind of filling it out a little bit more, but that is precisely the dynamic. That's what if I can't have you, then nobody can, right? Is more or less exactly what he says to Maegwyn as he throws the javelin. Yeah. So I think that can really work and not just look random and unexpected. Again, Turgon's not going to expect it because he doesn't know the whole abusive background, right? Certainly, the guards and onlookers, poor Glorfindel, who's going to be standing right there, right, is, surely we're going to have Ecthelion and Glorfindel in the room, right, when this happens. And they're not gonna, by the way, I'm assuming we're cutting Legolas Greenleaf, right? For the sake of avoiding confusion, I assume we're not having Legolas Greenleaf here. For those who are listening who are in the original, in the Book of Lost Tales version, Legolas Greenleaf is a Gondolin elf who takes part in the whole thing. He is not like Glorfindel. In fact, that same Legolas, no relation. Tolkien steals the name again later on, but we're not gonna keep him.
I kind of think we should now.
The only minor Gondolin, I'm just kind of reviewing in my head, the only minor Gondolin characters, minor compared to Turgon and Aredhel and Idril, we've got Glorfindel, we've got Ecthelion, we've got Pengolov. We'll have Rogren, obviously, later on, but that's it, right? Just those three?
We've introduced the names of the lords of all the houses at this point. So Galdor is the one leading the Sindar who have gone to Gondolin. So he's had a few lines, and I believe Egelmoth was there in the scene where they discovered Gondolin, and it's we've thrown the minor lords in, kind of look, there's more lords of Gondolin.
Right. Right.
But yeah, we haven't done very much with them. It's mostly Glorfindel and Ecthelion, and like you said, Rogren, and then Pengalod being the son of Penlod, one of the other lords. So
Right. Right.
those are the only characters we spend enough time with to really understand their characters.
Right. Right. And obviously they're not important to this. I'm just kind of trying to keep in my head whom we would recognize in the room.
Of all the houses to make sure they've shown up on screen at least once, right?
Right. Definitely. Yep, they're going to be important later. Okay, cool. So now let's get to the last question, the execution issue, right? So Aredhel...
multiple questions about this in the comments. By the way,
exactly.
About why is this okay?
And we've doubled down on this, right?
Yes.
I mean, earlier in this season, by making it a huge, like, that capital punishment was a stumbling block to the elves, right? They thought the humans were orcs because they were using capital punishment. And so, like, it's plan A for Turgon, right? Like, it's a thing in Gondolin, apparently. So we have to set this up really carefully, right?
Right. So the deal is that this is not the first time there's been a case where an elf has killed another elf. You know, kinslayings have happened in the past for the Noldor. However, the punishment for the kinslaying that they were all part of was banishment.
Right.
The Valar banished them from Valinor on account of what they did, and Feanor was banished from Tyrion when he threatened his brother with a sword. So the go-to punishment is banishment.
Right.
This is Gondolin.
How do you banish somebody from Gondolin? Yes, exactly.
Gondolin. So really, they're only left with two choices. If banishment is no longer an option, you either have to do permanent imprisonment.
Yep.
I mean, it's not even lifetime; it's permanent.
Permanent. Yes.
Or execution. Like, either would be an option. So that was the thing: is that there is no exiling Gondolin.
It is interesting. Logically, yes. Yeah. No, that's a now of course, one of the challenges is that we don't have time for a discussion of jurisprudence in the episode, right? So we have to
Turgon is going to give a little bit of a speech before they check him off the walls. So his pronouncement of what Eol has earned and why can include and this is why it has to be this way.
Yeah.
Thing. He's obviously, like you said, he's not going to go into a whole description, but I think mentioning that, like exile, that's kind of what you asked for that caused this whole thing. So no, you don't get that.
Right. But that's okay. I mean, here's the main thing we have to avoid, right? We can't have, because it is possible. I'm not saying I think the text suggests this, but I think the text would endure the reading that says Turgon was ready to show mercy on Eol, but then Aredhel dies, and in rage he has him executed, right? If it looks like an emotional decision on Turgon's point, like, I am so angry at you, I'm going to execute you now, that is bad. Like, that does not fit with what we've seen. That would be a real violation that would be hard to stomach, especially in so we have to be really careful not to let it look like that. So a little speech from him, kind of talking about this, because surely this has never happened before, right? There's never been an execution in Gondolin before. So, and not to mention that, again, hey, I propose we have a little kinslaying this afternoon. It's a big deal. It's so much bigger of a deal among the elves in almost every way, right? Than capital punishment is among humans. So yeah, I mean, would we have, we could, with our crowd of Gondolindrim lords who are standing around, right, we could have some various kind of, I don't mean we have a whole council and debate, but like just in people's facial expressions and stuff, we could have varieties of reactions, right? Different kinds of murmurings and things as this is going. There would be some people probably who would be enthusiastic about the execution of Eol, right? There would be some people who would be shocked and disquieted by the idea of an execution and wondering whether this was, but giving Turgon the benefit of the doubt.
I don't think there's going to be any excitement for it. I think it's more somber, shading into shock. Like, this is not the, hey, everybody, let's come check out the exciting thing happening in the main square. I hear there's an execution today. Like,
right.
That is not the atmosphere. So mostly everyone just kind of standing there silently while it happens, and then their reactions to it. We did talk a good bit about what to show or not show. So showing him get pushed over the wall is okay.
Yeah.
According to us, anyway. So
I think we can't. I mean, like, have it happen totally off screen, like especially since it is a really shocking thing. I mean, like, this is a big deal. Are there any other examples? Are we going to get a single other elvish execution?
I mean, Myglin's going to get tossed off the same wall, but in different circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to be fighting when it happens, right?
Yeah.
But just like a straight up cold-blooded execution in this way, I don't think we get one, right? As you say, won't be the only elf to plummet to his death. I mean, Cyros will do that for as far as that's concerned as well, right? But this kind of just like a pure judicial execution, this is a big deal, and so we can't totally shy away from it, but I agree, a shove off the wall and a little bit of discreet plummeting.
Well, that was the thing, is we didn't want to show the plummeting part.
Okay,
because
no plummeting at all.
Well,
not even a discreet plummeting.
Not even like from a distance, a black speck descending the white walls.
That's Denethor off the prow of the ship, and
no, it needn't be. First of all, he's not. They're not going to set him on fire first, for one thing, right?
That helps. But but the point is, someone falling and going
No, I don't mean no. Yeah. I'm just okay.
Yeah. So the idea was show him getting pushed.
Yeah, show him getting pushed.
There's some reactions to him being pushed.
Yeah.
And then show his dead body at the bottom.
Then show the broken carcass at the bottom. Okay, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it would still be pretty shocking and evidence that he is in fact dead. He died here, but we don't have to show the fall. Are you okay with that, or did you really want to?
I don't insist on the fall. I don't insist. I certainly am not imagining like close-ups of him, like those shots of the Alan Rickman villain plummeting to his death in Die Hard, right? Like that look, facial look. Like, I'm not saying we need something like that, right? I'm not talking about any. It's fine. It's fine. I was.
Corey would settle for just like a fading voice, and then a distant.
No. Not that either. So I guess there are two things that I'm. Right, exactly. And like the little splat sound that they use at Swamp Castle in the Holy Grail, right? No, but the reason I was kind of envisioning the plummeting is, of course, I'm thinking about Myglin's death later on, right? And I want to make sure that because I want to make sure that we clearly establish this is the same spot. When Myglin falls to his death, it's got to, it's got to be really clear that this is the same spot. So I was kind of thinking, I was picturing a sort of context, right? So like, I brought a visual aid. So I was imagining a shot not quite this far away from Gondolin, right? But just so that we can see like where in the city is it? So that because it's not just that we need to have when Myglin falls to his death, they need to be like, oh wait, he's falling in the same spot, right? We can build up to that, right? Like when Myglin confronts Aredhel and juvenile Earendil during the battle, right, and tries to take them, it's going to be in the spot, right, and we can see the spot, and of course we'll be setting up the spot, right, as other parts of Gondolin are on fire and everything else, right, so anyway, and the anticipation, it's my anticipation of the Miglin moment that's mostly guiding me here.
I agree that the scene where the execution is should be distinctive and unique. So we should recognize that location in Gondolin. And if we need an establishing shot to do that, so that, like as Nick is saying, give you some context for the bigger parts of the city of where that is, like that's fine. It's just the part where we show him falling off the wall doesn't help anything. Like we couldn't come up with a good reason to show the fall. We could see good reason to show the shoving off, and we could see good reason to see the dead body at the bottom.
Okay.
But the fall itself was breaking up the scene in a way that wasn't.
I can think of a reason, but I think that the reason that I can think of is totally satisfied by the corpse at the bottom. As long as I get a corpse, I'm okay, right? Because the reason... Yeah. The primary reason that I would say is that, like, violence has been done in Gondolin, right? There's like a stain on Gondolin, right? So bloody corpse at the bottom, I'm okay with that, right? Especially if the bloody corpse is not going to be on a random slope of the mountain either, right? I mean, it's going to be, so like there should be an obvious disjunction here, right? This should be like broken elf corpse lying in Gondolin, right? The first death ever to happen in Gondolin. Well, second death. Aredhel beat him by a little bit. But anyway, first violent death. Okay, technically. Anyway, never mind. Understand? You see what I'm saying, though? Like, this is a big deal, right? And should establish, I mean, it establishes, this is, the broken corpse of Eol is literally laying the foundation for, like, the many other elf corpses that will someday be seen in Gondolin. So, that's the main thing, but it's fine. The corpse can establish that perfectly well, which leads me to perhaps the last question about this, and that is, Turgon decides on execution because execution is better than permanent incarceration, which, by the way, seems to me totally justifiable. In fact, I can almost imagine people who argue against capital punishment talk about, like, how extreme it is, right? How permanent it is. Well, for the Eldar, execution is a good deal less permanent than permanent incarceration, right? I mean, life in prison, that's irreversible. That's permanent, right? Whereas, you push him off a cliff and then let Mando sort it out, right? I mean, and he could be redeemed. He could get healed. He could repent in Mando's. It's less extreme, right? Actually, than incarceration for the Eldar. So I can totally see that. But the question: why push him off a cliff? Why that method of execution? And why this cliff? There has to be. Again, it's not like let's take him to Yield execution cliff. This is not like the Tarpeian Rock in Rome, right? There's not an established gibbet.
Sort of a related question to this too. Like earlier, we were hinting at that we didn't want this to feel like that he was doing it out of anger, but I feel like it doesn't seem to me to be a huge problem if it is a little personal. In the sense that he's like, all right, well, I've had it with this guy, especially once Aredhel's dead. It was like, you know what? As long as she was alive and willing to advocate for Eol, there's like, okay, well, I should respect her wishes and like find a way to work things out with Eol and have mercy. But then once she dies, it's like, yeah, you know what? Forget it. I'm not dealing with this guy.
Right.
And I think, and so it seems to me like it's sort of okay if for starters, if the choice to push him off a cliff as opposed to imprison him forever is a little personal and a little sort of like, 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 okay, I'm just done with him.
Well, it can't be a totally dispassionate decision, especially given the extreme emotional positive reaction he was in the middle of that got interrupted by the murder, right? So yeah.
And he's completely set up, and he's been handed sort of the petty justification for it, in the sense that all of this transpired because Eol had made it perfectly clear that the last thing he wanted was to stay here forever. So it's like, well, you don't want to be here forever. I've got your exit right here.
Right, exactly. He's opted out of life imprisonment because he's is okay. Well, I'm not okay, right? So this is what he's chosen.
It seems fine if the choice of method and also the like location have some kind of special meaning.
Yeah. So they're gonna throw him off. They're not gonna like chop his head off or something, because why should they? They don't want to stain just because they're going to execute the guy doesn't mean they have to like make.
They don't need to build a tool to execute someone. They're not going to construct a guillotine. They're not going to erect a gallows.
A gallows, right.
Yeah, they are, and they're not going to grab a sword and hack his head off.
They're not going to soil one of their own swords with the blood of their kin. Yeah.
Right.
Or dirty their own hands. I mean, you could say like the hands of the ones who pushed him are still kind of dirty, but still less so. I mean, the blood matters, right? I mean, thinking of, Caranthir's taunt, come thus red-handed, or sorry, Thingol's taunt, come thus red-handed, right, from the slaying of your kin, right? Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that was all I was going to say, is that they're not going to build a tool to do this.
Yeah.
So the pushing him off is the part where there's no tool involved.
Yeah, they just have to improvise.
Yeah. So, but that brings me back to why here? Because it doesn't have to be a conveniently high cliff. It doesn't take a very high cliff. So like pushing him out a third-story window might do it. Though I suppose the Eldar are particularly hardy, so you might need to go to a 6th or 7th story. But he could have done it in any number of ways, right? Why here? Why this spot? Like, because I mean, this is a big moment.
Some kind of personal.
There has to be a reason
like
for the
Aredhel's
choice.
Favorite spot from her childhood.
Right.
Well, I mean, no, not no one's childhood here, but the
yes, right.
But
good point.
Right.
But a spot where we've shown Turgon and Aredhel interacting before, or one of them was the place where he put his 2 trees up.
Right.
And that would be kind of not like a judgment seat, but still a like maybe the heart of Gondolin or something, in the sense of like that's what Gondolin is all about. And this is a person who has violated that, so this person needs to get out, and so we're just going to push him over the wall.
Right.
That kind of imagery might work.
Right. Does he? Because I mean, he would. First of all, the fact that he does it in a very public place also makes sense. Like he would not want. I mean, he would not want this to happen in secret. Like that would be a bad look. You don't want the people of Gondolin to be like, I heard a rumor that like Turgon totally offed that new guy, right? Like, I mean, if he's going to do it, he's going to do it honestly and in public, right? I mean, that seems like a Turgon, a piece of Turgonish jurisprudence, right? To say if we're gonna do this execution thing, we're gonna do this honestly and openly, and explain this to everybody in the full light of day. So that he does it in public makes all kinds of sense. And so therefore I would expect it to be he could take him up to the top of his tower and push him off, right? But he's not going to do that. He is going to do this like in a public square, basically. Not because, as you say, everybody in town is like, hey, there's a hanging today, let's go see. But again, because it's, I mean, if you're going to do this justice thing, and if he feels that execution is justified, he's going to do it openly, before everybody. That makes sense to me. But the reason I feel like it has to be a spot that he he's going to know. First execution ever, right? Everyone's going to always think of that. Like this spot in Gondolin is going to be permanently changed by this moment. I said they didn't have a Tarpeian rock, right? The famous rock that they threw traitors off of to execute them in Rome. But they do now, right? I mean, like so he's got to know. So he's got to be thinking that, right? This is going to be like everyone in Gondolin will always remember, will always associate this spot with execution. And so he's got to be. I cannot imagine he is not deliberate about that. And so there needs to be, not to mention the fact that, just forgetting Turgon for a second, for our purposes, we want it to be visually logical, right? We want the viewer's associations with this to be consonant, significant, right? We want to be managing the context, not just to be like, here's like a random wall, stretch of wall and him plummeting down onto a random stretch of cliff. We could do that, but I think we lose a lot of opportunities here. And as I say, I can't imagine Turgon actually thinking that way. Ilana is recalling that there's a scene overlooking this city where Aredhel shows him her view of it at the beginning. I think, was that, Marie, the one you were thinking of, where the two of them were standing and talking early, like in episode 1?
Well, yeah, there's a few scenes in episode 1 between Aredhel and Turgon in Gondolin. So having one of those scenes work. The one where she goes up to show the view of the city, I believe she's with Glorfindel and Ecthelion. They were at least in that scene for some reason. So I'm not sure that would work as far as throwing people off cliffs goes. But, I mean, something right, where it ties back to that first episode. The one I was thinking of is when she meets Turgon under the trees, and they start talking about the conversation that leads up to their confrontation. So, mostly because the two trees is probably the most distinctive place in Gondolin. Like everyone knows that there's only one place that looks like that. Whereas if it's a wall around the city, unless there's something on the wall.
Right. Yeah. Again, it has to be easily visually recognizable. Even because remember, it not only has to be recognizable when Maiglin gets thrown up, but remember, lighting is going to be very different when Maiglin gets thrown off the wall, right? It's going to be in the middle of the battle. Things are going to be on fire so it's going to look very different. And so therefore we need to, there's going to be smoke, there's going to be fire, there's going to be people running around, there's going to be orcs potentially. So we need to make there has to be some really distinctive landmark. The two trees works for really distinctive landmarks. And Ryan Kimball on YouTube was saying, can it be a perimeter cliff? I mean, Ryan, I've always kind of imagined that too. But it has to be distinctive, right? It can't just be a random stretch of wall, or like a random stretch of wall next to a particular tower or something. Because again, we have to be able to, and again, not to mention, I can't imagine Turgon is like, okay, let's do the first Elvish execution ever. Let's take it. Yeah, this looks like a good spot. Let's chuck him off here. Like it's not I can't imagine that's the way Turgon thinks. It's got to be a significant spot.
Right. So a significant place with a space for a large public gathering. So a square or, something, not just like a corner somewhere, and a distinctive landmark, and on the perimeter wall. Right. So like right up against it. So I know Nick just said something about the main gate to the city being a good idea. I would think that the two trees would be visible when you come in through the main gate. I don't know that we established where exactly those are, but if you go through a main gate and there's a square and then there's the two trees, that all might fit together pretty well. Mm-hmm. The problem is, would Tuor and
I was thinking we do have to make sure we can contrive to get Idril and Earendel there.
Because I don't think they'd be by the main gate.
That is certainly not the direction of her. I mean, Idril's not going to be digging her tunnel right next to the main gate. Like, that's certainly not going to happen. But it's okay. Like, we could get, I mean, yeah, but the main gate's not going to be on the way from anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but there's other gates around the city, and if one of them is where there's a square that has a fountain. Oh wait, nope. Sorry, Ectelian's busy there right now.
Yeah. No, the fountain's occupied.
The fountain is off base. The tower is off limits. The main gate's probably a little busy. So yeah, it has to be a little bit off, out of the way, but distinctive.
Could we have? Is there any absolute reason why we can't have like the major courtyard outside Turgon's tower, back against the wall?
Right, that would be a good idea, because if it's not like the main courtyard of the whole city, but it's the main part of the royal area, it would make sense that Tuor and Idril's house is in the royal.
Exactly, that they live there. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So that would be a place that Idril could have put the entrance to her tunnel, and
also I kind of like the two trees of Turgon. If the two trees of Turgon are in a big courtyard out near the top of the city, near a drop outside the tall tower, which may or may not have some association with Ecthelion. I mean, again, I like the anticipation of Minas Tirith is what I'm saying here, right? That
the Tower of Ecthelion and there's a big tree
and the white tree and right. And it's not identical.
Fall off into the city if you really wanted to.
Right? Yeah, you could fall off the other side into the city, or you could exactly. So I mean, obviously we don't like go too hard into those parallels, but it's an echo, right? I mean, it's an echo. Potentially. So I kind of like that. But anyway, so yeah, if we did that, then it's easier and more logical, because also here's another thing. If I'm thinking like Turgon, right? Another way to think like Turgon here is this is also very logically the place where the javelin was thrown, right? I mean, like the crime happened here. Right. Okay. If they're brought in, Turgon comes out of his, they bring them up into the city. And so the reunion happens here under the trees next to the tower, not in the throne room inside necessarily, but he's come out and here they are in the courtyard outside the tower and everything. And this is where the javelin gets chucked in the first place. So, that the execution happens at the scene of the crime is a kind of logic that works. I think.
And that would be a good reiteration of what's going on there. Yeah. So I think that would give all the meaning to the scene that you needed without someone stopping to say, and the reason we're having this execution here is because.
Right.
If it's the scene where the crime happened, the audience will get it.
Right. And yeah, that would be easy to convey non-verbally. So all we need is this to back against one of the walls of the city, which, and so all we need is something kind of like the rocky outcropping that we get, right? The tall, so it'd be up here somewhere. It's just, this isn't in the middle of the city, but is, back on one side. Mm-hmm. I think we can arrange it. That way we can still, because I agree they're not going to chuck him off to have him crash down in the streets and then somebody's got to clean it up, right? Like that's not how he would do it. Even for symbolic purposes, the symbolism is not good there, and Turgon would know that full well. Now, so Orion, I don't think he wouldn't take him out to the perimeter of the valley, like out to the edge of Tomb Laden. I mean, there are plenty of cliffs out there. I think it's definitely got to be in the city. But otherwise, from the viewers, it's just going to look like, and here we are on random cliff, right? Okay. It's true. Someone's going to have to clean it up anyway, Nick. But seriously, you don't want blood stains. No one's going to want blood stains in the streets of Gondolin, right? No matter how carefully it gets cleaned up afterwards. So clearly they're not going to do that. That's perfectly clear. But again, you push him out, he still falls in the rocks. He still falls outside the city walls. So, yep. Yeah, that's good. Okay. All right. I think that was all my questions about Aredhel and Eol.
As you can see, just because this storyline is directly from the text doesn't mean there's nothing to talk about.
No, well, because this is
problem when we were splitting up these scenes.
Exactly. I mean, and this is, I mean, yeah, just because the general decisions that were made don't depart from the text doesn't mean that it's not really important to think this through. And that's, scenes like this, like being able to think about, whole scenes from the Silmarillion in this, rich new context that we've given it through this creative project is one of the whole, payoffs, right, of this entire thing. So, no apologies. There's good news and bad news, Marie. The bad news is that we haven't gotten to the B and C plot in today's session. But the good news is that this was the A plot and the primary story, so there shouldn't be nearly as much to talk about in the B and C plots, right?
Fingolfin's vision remains, and I believe there's a lot to talk about there, because that is something that is entirely made up by us. And by us, I might mean the three people in this podcast, but I might not.
But you might not, yes. There is at least the introduction of certain unexpected characters that I did not know were going to be in this episode and was rather surprised to find there.
Right. So there's some things to talk about and to see how you feel about some of these suggested choices. But
this is me not apologizing for the fact that we clearly need some more time to talk about this one. But that's good. That's good. So next time we shall broach the controversial end. Plenty of rich stuff to talk about here with the A plot, but lots to talk about in the B and C plot.
Good news is this gives everybody enough time to go back and re-listen to when we brainstorm this idea and remind ourselves of what we said, and then we can see what Nick and Marie are trying to sneak past us.
That's the thing. Yeah, too often have they tried to rely upon the fact that our memory is really terrible and only getting worse. So yes, that's we're trying to bail ourselves out here. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So that's great. And our next session, so of course we're speeding through the parts we're not getting to. So our next session is going to be on July 29th. So we're going back to, that's resuming to our normal original schedule, right? We've shifted a whole bunch of episodes around and skipped from what's been happening here, but everything will be back to normal on July 29th, and then we'll be proceeding thereafter. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Good job, at least until we deviate again.
So you would like to continue discussing this episode on July 29th and save other topics for later?
I think we probably should. We should probably there's no postponing the evil day. I think we will need to finish this discussion. And by the way, this only gives more opportunity for folks to contribute to the discussion on sets, props, and locations. I always enjoy the location, the location spotting. We blow a big part of our theoretically infinite fantasy budget on location spotting every season, so that's always a fun time. So we're gonna we look forward to that. But yes, so there's still time. There'll be an extra 2 weeks to be able to participate in that. So if you go to forums.signumuniversity.org, click through to Film and season 5, and you'll see a sub forum there for sets, props, and locations, so you can make suggestions, make comments on the stuff that's there, and we'll be able to incorporate that into our discussion. That will happen. Wait, sorry?
Post pictures.
Exactly. Post pictures of proposed locations. Exactly. So that we'll come back to that in August then. So excellent. Cool. Next time we will discuss the Vision of Fingolfin, and that will be so much fun.
And now that you have seen the outline, you have a little bit of time to think about how you feel about it. So
That's true.
You can go into
Exactly.
that conversation with everybody being on the same page and no one being blindsided.
Who knows? Who knows? Maybe everything will grow on me like 5'1" Howth grew on me in between these past 2 episodes.
True.
5'3", sorry. Yeah, sorry. 5'3". She's a towering, tall member of the Holodene, right? The rest of the Holodene are all like, 4'11", 5 feet tall, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. All right. Excellent. Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Marie and Dave, for joining me. This was a really fun discussion. Loved mapping this out today. And this is like one of the last times I'm going to have the excuse to use my Gondolin background for the rest of the season, as we have officially brought the Gondolin story to an end, right? And do we get any? We don't get any like Turgan shots, do we?
At the end of the season, the end of episode 13, we're going to bring Fingolfin's body back to Gondolin, and Turgan.
Of course.
So
Right, the corpse.
Yeah. At the very end of the season.
Right.
But this
Okay.
is the last story in Gondolin yet.
Right. Of course. Yeah. No. Of course. I forgot about Fingolfin's body at the very end. So okay. Cool. So right. Excellent. Anyway, thank you, everybody, and thanks everybody for your contributions to the discussion forum and to our discussion here tonight. Always great to have people involved in this discussion. So I will end by saying, as always, thanks for listening and Godspeed.